After 15 years of living happily together, I got stabbed in the back by the dearest person in the world. But in the end, I came out the winner. The night my life changed began so quietly, it felt surreal in retrospect. It was a Tuesday, one of those unremarkable evenings that blend into the monotony of 15 years of marriage. Madison, my wife, had made dinner like usual, spaghetti carbonara, her favorite. But that night, she added something unusual. An open bottle of our best red wine, breathing in the center of the table, and 2 glasses set neatly beside it. It wasn't our anniversary or a special occasion, but I figured maybe she wanted a romantic moment. Madison was always the thoughtful one, the one who knew how to keep the spark alive, even when life got busy. I should have known better when I saw her hands tremble ever so slightly as she poured the wine, the liquid swirling into our glasses like blood. "Michael, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice calm, almost too calm. Now, I'm no stranger to the phrase, "we need to talk." It's the universal prelude to bad news, a harbinger of things unraveling. But Madison didn't look upset. She didn't even look angry. Her expression was serene, distant, like she was already somewhere else in her mind. I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair, trying to read her. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Did something happen at work?" No, she replied quickly, taking a sip of her wine. "It's not about work." I waited, the silence between us stretching, growing heavier with each passing second. Madison wasn't one to struggle for words. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't easy for her. That much was clear. Then she sighed, setting her glass down carefully, and began to speak. And that's when everything started to change. Madison's eyes locked onto mine, her calm exterior cracking just enough to let a flicker of unease show through. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "have you ever felt trapped?" I blinked, caught off guard. Trapped? It wasn't the kind of question I expected, not from her. Madison was the epitome of confidence, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel at ease. She'd always been my anchor, steady, reliable. Trapped? I repeated, trying to buy myself a moment to think. "In what way?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "In life. In routine. Like every day is the same, and you're just existing." Her words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. My mind raced to connect the dots. Was this about work? The kids? Our marriage? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. "Well," I started cautiously, "life can get monotonous sometimes. But I thought we were happy. Aren't we?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked down at her wine, as if searching for answers at the bottom of the glass. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice quieter now. "About us. About what I want." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" "Maddie, you're scaring me." "I don't mean to," she said quickly, her hand reaching across the table to touch mine. Her touch was warm, familiar, but it didn't comfort me the way it usually did. I feel like I've lost myself. Somewhere along the way, I became your wife, the kid's mom, and I forgot who Madison is." I sat back, stunned. "Forgot who you are?" "Maddie, we've been together for 20 years. You're the same person I fell in love with, the same person who—" "No, I'm not," she interrupted, her voice sharper now. "I've changed, Michael, and I need time to figure out what that means." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Are you saying you want space? A separation?" Her silence was the answer I didn't want. I couldn't believe it. Madison, the woman who had been my partner, my best friend, my everything, was asking for space, for time, for distance, from me. Is there someone else? The question came out before I could stop it, my voice trembling. The thought had barely crossed my mind, but once it was out in the open, it felt like a living thing, clawing at my insides. Madison's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "This isn't about anyone else, Michael. It's about me." Her denial should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. There was something in her tone, something in the way she avoided my gaze, that didn't sit right. I didn't press her, though. Not yet. I needed to process what she'd already said before I could dig any deeper. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Madison excused herself early, retreating to the bedroom, while I stayed at the dining table, staring at the now empty wine bottle. My thoughts spiraled in 100 directions, none of them good. What did she mean by finding herself? Why now, after all these years? And why did I feel like there was a shadow of something she wasn't telling me? I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning, the first crack in the foundation of our life together. And as much as I wanted to believe we could patch things up, deep down, I feared the worst was yet to come. The next morning, the air in the house felt different, thick, heavy, and suffocating. Madison avoided me, claiming she had errands to run. She kissed me on the cheek before she left, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like a habit than affection. I spent the day replaying our conversation, dissecting every word, every pause, every subtle shift in her expression. Something didn't add up. Madison wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions, especially not about something as monumental as our marriage. If she wanted space, there had to be a reason, a catalyst. That evening, I decided to confront her, to push past the vagueness and get real answers. But when she came home, she was smiling, almost cheerful, as though our conversation the night before hadn't happened. She moved through the house with an easy grace, humming to herself as she unpacked groceries. For a moment, I doubted my instincts. Maybe she really just needed time to sort out her feelings. Maybe I was overthinking it. But then I saw her phone. It was on the kitchen counter, buzzing silently with a notification. Madison was in the living room, so I couldn't resist taking a glance. The message preview read, "Chris, had a great time today. Can't wait to see you again." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Chris? Who was Chris? My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it innocent? A coworker? A friend? Or was this the someone else she had so vehemently denied? I set the phone down just as Madison walked into the kitchen. She saw me standing there, her eyes darting to the phone for a split second before settling on me. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone light but with a hint of caution. I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, just lost in thought." She nodded, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she picked up her phone. She glanced at the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line before she slipped it into her pocket. The rest of the evening was a blur. Madison acted normal, too normal, while I tried to keep my composure. I wanted to ask her about the message, to demand an explanation, but I held back. If she was hiding something, I needed to know more before confronting her. I didn't want to give her a chance to cover her tracks. That night, as Madison slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind churning with questions. Who was Chris? How long had this been going on? Was she really finding herself? Or was that just an excuse to cover for something far more devastating? I decided I couldn't sit in the dark any longer. Quietly, I got out of bed and went to her phone, which she'd left charging on the dresser. It was locked, of course, but Madison had never been secretive about her passcode before. My hands shook as I keyed in the 4 digits. The screen unlocked. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through her messages. At first, it was mundane, text with friends, reminders about appointments. But then I found the thread with Chris. The messages weren't outright explicit, but they didn't need to be. The tone was unmistakable, flirty, playful, intimate. One in particular stood out. "Chris, I missed you today. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore." My heart dropped. There it was. The confirmation of what I had feared but didn't want to believe. Madison wasn't just questioning our marriage. She was actively betraying it. I put the phone back and returned to bed, my mind numb. Madison stirred as I slid under the covers, murmuring something incoherent before settling back into sleep. I lay there, staring at the back of her head, wondering how the woman I'd built my life with could lie so easily, so convincingly. And then, a darker thought crept in. If she was lying about this, what else was she capable of hiding? The morning came too quickly, and with it, the unbearable task of pretending everything was normal. Madison was in a surprisingly good mood, humming softly as she made coffee. I couldn't help but watch her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who was sneaking around behind my back. "Are you okay?" she asked, catching my gaze. Her tone was casual, but her eyes searched mine, as though she could sense something had shifted. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and went back to stirring her coffee. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand she explain the messages with Chris, but something stopped me. I needed more time to think, to decide what to do next. That day, I started keeping my distance. I went for a long drive after work, circling aimlessly through the outskirts of town, my thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation, some misunderstanding that could fix this. But the texts with Chris echoed in my mind, shattering any illusions I tried to cling to. When I returned home, Madison was already setting the table for dinner. She glanced up as I walked in, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "You're late," she said, her tone light but tinged with curiosity. "Yeah," I replied, shrugging as I set my keys on the counter. "Got caught up at work." She didn't press further, but I could feel her eyes on me as I moved through the house. Her gaze felt heavier than usual, as though she was searching for something, trying to gauge if I knew more than I was letting on. Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deafening. I focused on my plate, avoiding her eyes, while Madison made small talk about her day. She mentioned running errands, seeing an old friend for coffee. I wondered how much of it was true and how much was a cover for something else. After dinner, I excused myself to the study, claiming I had work to catch up on. In reality, I needed to breathe, to process the growing weight of my suspicions. I pulled out my laptop and began searching for private investigators in the area. If Madison was lying to me, I needed proof, solid, undeniable proof. As I scrolled through reviews and contact information, my phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Madison. "Madison, you seem distant tonight. Are you sure everything's okay?" The irony of her concern nearly made me laugh. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a quick reply. "Me, I'm fine. Just work stuff." Her response came almost immediately. "Madison, okay. Let me know if you want to talk." I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the screen, wondering how she could lie so effortlessly. Did she feel guilty at all? Or had she convinced herself that what she was doing was justified? Later that night, as we lay in bed, Madison reached out, her hand brushing against mine. "Michael," she murmured, her voice soft, "you know I love you, right?" The words hit me like a slap. I turned to face her, searching her eyes for some sign of remorse, some crack in her mask. But her expression was serene, almost tender, as though she truly believed what she was saying. "I love you too," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. She smiled and nestled closer, her head resting on my shoulder. And as I held her, My heart ached with the weight of betrayal. How could someone who claimed to love me do this? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? The next few days were a slow descent into quiet paranoia. Madison continued to act as though everything was fine, perhaps too fine. She'd started doting on me more than usual, cooking my favorite meals, asking about my day with a level of attentiveness that felt staged. I couldn't help but wonder if it was guilt driving her, or an attempt to keep me distracted. Meanwhile, I played my role as the oblivious husband, though inside, I was anything but. The private investigator I had contacted, a gruff but efficient man named Harris, wasted no time getting to work. I handed him what little information I had, Madison's erratic behavior, the mysterious Chris, and a rough timeline of her errands and meetups. He assured me he'd uncover the truth. That week, I found myself watching her more closely, analyzing every gesture, every word. Madison's phone rarely left her side now, a subtle but telling change from her usual habits. Once, as she showered, I saw it sitting unattended on the counter. I thought about checking it again but stopped myself. The last thing I wanted was for her to catch me in the act. Harris called a few days later, his tone curt but tinged with something I couldn't place. "I've got some initial findings," he said. "You might want to meet in person for this." My stomach twisted. "Is it bad?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "It's significant," he replied cryptically. "Let's just say your instincts were right." We arranged to meet at a small diner on the edge of town that evening. I left the house under the pretense of working late, Madison barely looking up from her phone as I kissed her goodbye. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, the hum of the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the room. Harris sat in a corner booth, a manila folder in front of him. He gestured for me to sit, his expression grim. "I'll get straight to it," he began, sliding the folder across the table. "Your wife has been meeting this Chris guy regularly. Coffee shops, parks, even a hotel once." I stared at the folder, the words sinking in like lead. "A hotel," I repeated, my voice hollow. Harris nodded. "They were there for about 2 hours. I've got photos and timestamps if you need them for legal purposes." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were grainy photographs, Madison and a man I didn't recognize, their interactions intimate enough to leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship. In one, they were holding hands as they walked through a park. In another, they were sitting across from each other at a cafe, leaning in close as they talked. But the one that broke me was of them outside the hotel, Chris's arm draped casually over her shoulders as they laughed at something only they knew. "I'm sorry," Harris said, his tone softer now. "I know this isn't easy to hear." I closed the folder, my chest tight with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Thank you," I managed, my voice strained. "I'll let you know if I need anything else." Harris nodded, slipping a business card across the table. "Take care of yourself, Michael. This kind of thing, it can mess with your head if you're not careful." I left the diner in a daze, the folder tucked under my arm like a damning secret. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How could she look me in the eye and lie so easily? And most haunting of all, what was her endgame? When I walked through the door, Madison greeted me with a warm smile. "You're late," she teased, wrapping her arms around me. "Did you have a rough day?" I looked down at her, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, and felt a wave of cold detachment. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "Something like that." As I lay in bed that night, the folder hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was out, and sooner or later, Madison would have to face it. But I still didn't know just how deep her betrayal went, or the dangerous path she was about to take to cover her tracks. The days that followed were a blur of strained silence and mounting tension. Madison was acting almost too normal, her smiles brighter, her attention more focused, as if overcompensating for the cracks in our marriage that she must have sensed. Meanwhile, I withdrew further, my thoughts consumed by the contents of that manila folder and the storm of emotions they unleashed. I knew I needed a plan, but every scenario I imagined ended in chaos. Would confronting her lead to an explosive fight? Would she deny it, even with the evidence? Worse, would she leave without an ounce of regret? The answer came sooner than I expected, and not in the way I imagined. It was a Saturday evening, and Madison suggested we have a quiet dinner at home. She even pulled out our good china, something she hadn't done in years, and cooked a full spread. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and sautéed green beans. The effort struck me as odd, but I played along, curious to see where this was going. As we ate, she seemed distracted, her fork pushing the food around on her plate more than eating it. Finally, she broke the silence. "Michael," she said, her voice soft, "I feel like we've been a little off lately. Is everything okay?" I set my glass down, my heart pounding. She was testing the waters, I realized, trying to gauge how much I knew. "I don't know," I replied carefully. "You tell me." Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Panic? It was hard to tell. I don't want us to drift apart," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her touch felt foreign now, like the hand of a stranger. "You mean so much to me, Michael." I swallowed the bitter laugh that threatened to escape. "Is that why you've been meeting with Chris?" Her hand recoiled as if I'd burned her. The color drained from her face, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I know," I said, my voice calm but cold. "I know about the texts, the meetings, the hotel." Her breathing quickened, her eyes wide with shock. "Michael, it's not what you think." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by lying. I've seen the pictures. I know everything." For a moment, she said nothing, her expression shifting between guilt and defiance. Then she exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "It's not what you think. I got lost, Michael. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, anger rising in my chest. "A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt, Madison. This is betrayal." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Not now. Not after everything." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear, Michael, I still love you." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call sneaking around with another man?" "I ended it," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her tone. "It's over. I ended it weeks ago." The words were like a dagger twisting in my chest. "Weeks?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "So it wasn't just once?" She looked away, her silence confirming what I already knew. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You've lied to me, betrayed me, and now you want me to just move on like nothing happened?" "Michael, please," she cried, standing as well. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." But it wasn't just her words that stopped me. It was the look in her eyes. There was something there, something darker, as if she was calculating her next move. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. What was she willing to do to keep this secret buried? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Madison was in the guest room, her muffled sobs echoing faintly through the house. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, and now this strange sense of unease that I couldn't shake. And then, it hit me. Madison wasn't done yet. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't over. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. Madison didn't come down for breakfast, and I didn't go looking for her. I spent the day in a daze, alternating between rage and a growing sense of unease. Her sobs from the night before still echoed in my mind, but it was her final, desperate plea that unsettled me most. The way she said, "I'll do whatever it takes," lingered like a shadow over everything. By evening, she emerged, looking composed, too composed. Her hair was neatly styled, her face carefully made up, and she wore the soft smile of someone pretending everything was fine. "Michael," she said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder as I sat on the couch. "Can we have dinner together tonight? Just the two of us. I want to talk." I glanced at her warily. "Talk about what?" "About us," she replied, her voice tinged with hope. "About how we can move forward." I didn't trust her, but curiosity got the better of me. "Fine," I said. "I'll be down in a bit." An hour later, I found the dining room table set with candles and our best silverware. Madison had prepared steak, mashed potatoes, and roasted asparagus, the kind of meal she knew I couldn't resist. She poured me a glass of wine as I sat down, her movements deliberate and smooth. As we ate, she spoke softly about the early years of our marriage, reminiscing about vacations, holidays, and milestones. It was almost enough to make me forget the betrayal, but the nagging unease wouldn't let me fully relax. Her charm felt calculated, her warmth hollow. "Michael," she said suddenly, breaking the nostalgic spell, "I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I need you to know how much you mean to me. I can't lose you." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine vulnerability. But then I remembered the texts, the hotel, the lies. "Words don't mean much right now, Madison," I said, setting down my fork. "You've already done the damage." Her expression tightened, but she quickly masked it with a nod. "You're right," she said softly. I wanted to show you how much I care." She reached for her glass, and I noticed her hands trembling slightly. I watched as she took a long sip of wine, her eyes darting to mine as she set the glass down. "You should drink yours," she said, her tone casual but her gaze too intent. "It pairs perfectly with the steak." I stared at the glass in front of me, unease prickling at the back of my neck. Something about her insistence didn't sit right. I picked it up slowly, swirling the wine as though I were savoring the aroma. "This bottle looks new," I said, glancing at the label. "Where'd you get it?" "Oh, just a little shop downtown," she replied quickly. "I thought it'd be nice for tonight." Her smile was too eager, her voice too rehearsed. My grip tightened on the glass, but I didn't take a sip. "You're not drinking much," I said, nodding toward her half-full glass. She hesitated, then laughed nervously. "I've never been much of a drinker, you know that." I set my glass down deliberately, leaning back in my chair. "You're right. You're not much of a drinker. So why the wine tonight?" Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying," I began, my voice cold and steady, "that I don't trust you. Not anymore." Her mask cracked. She stared at me, her breathing shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the table. And then, without warning, she bolted from the room, leaving me alone with the untouched glass of wine. My heart pounded as I sat there, staring at the glass. Something was wrong, deeply, dangerously wrong. I stood and went to the kitchen, pouring the wine into the sink. The scent was faint but unmistakable, bitter almonds. My stomach twisted. Cyanide. The realization hit me like a freight train. Madison, my wife of 15 years, had just tried to poison me. My hands trembled as I stared into the sink where the wine had swirled away, its faint almond scent still lingering in the air. Why? The question pulsed in my mind, each beat sharper than the last. Was it to hide her betrayal? To escape the inevitable fallout of her infidelity? Or had I misjudged her entirely, failing to see the cracks in her mind that had been widening for years? I needed answers. But more importantly, I needed to stay safe. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice steady despite the chaos in my head. "I believe my wife just tried to poison me," I told the dispatcher. "I need someone here now." The next few minutes felt like hours. I stayed in the kitchen, pacing back and forth, my ears tuned to any sound from upstairs where Madison had fled. The distant wail of sirens was both a relief and a warning. This wasn't just a marital crisis anymore. This was life and death. When the police arrived, I led them to the dining room, explaining everything as succinctly as I could. They took the wine glass, the bottle, and even scraped residue from the sink for testing. As they worked, another officer went upstairs to find Madison. She didn't resist. When they brought her down, her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She looked at me, her lips trembling, and for a moment, I thought she might plead her case. But she didn't say a word. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth Madison had always brought into our home. But the woman sitting across from the detectives wasn't the Madison I thought I knew. She was distant, detached, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she answered their questions. The truth unraveled slowly, painfully. Madison admitted to the affair with Chris, her voice cracking as she described how it had started as an escape from the monotony she felt in our marriage. But when I began pulling away, when I stopped playing the part of the oblivious husband, she panicked. "He knows," she told Chris during one of their secret meetings. "He's going to leave me." Chris, it turned out, wasn't just a lover. He was manipulative, a man with a history of toxic relationships. When Madison confided in him about her fears, he had a suggestion. "End it," he'd said. "If he's gone, we can be together. Free." Madison initially dismissed the idea, horrified by the thought. But as the days passed and her guilt and desperation consumed her, she started to believe there was no other way. She couldn't bear the shame of a public divorce, the judgment of our children, the life we'd built falling apart. So she bought the cyanide, researched how much to use, and planned the dinner. But in the end, she couldn't go through with it. When I confronted her at the table, she panicked and ran, unable to see her plan through. She confessed it all during her interrogation, her tears falling freely as the weight of her actions crashed down on her. Madison was charged with attempted murder. The trial was a grueling process, one that left me feeling like a hollow shell of the man I once was. Our children, devastated and confused, struggled to reconcile the mother they loved with the woman who had nearly destroyed everything. Chris vanished, unsurprisingly, leaving Madison to face the consequences alone. It was a bitter irony. She had risked everything for a man who cared nothing for her in return. Months later, I stood in what was once our home, now empty and quiet. The memories of our life together were everywhere. In the scuff marks on the floor from the kids' toys, in the faint scent of her favorite lavender candles. But they felt distant, like relics of a story that belonged to someone else. I moved out soon after, starting over in a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a place where I could begin to rebuild. People often ask me if I miss her, if I think about the good times we shared. And the answer is yes, I do. But those memories are tainted now, overshadowed by the betrayal, the lies, and the cold reality of how close I came to losing everything. In the end, Madison and I had been strangers long before the poison ever touched the wine glass. I just hadn't seen it until it was too late. And now, every day, I remind myself of one simple truth. Survival isn't just about living. It's about choosing to live. And that's exactly what I intend to do.